At this time, I'd like to introduce this year's speaker. At Tuskegee University, we have the most glorious honor of always, during homecoming, inviting back one of our 23,000 alumni who have distinguished themselves not only amongst the other sons and daughters of Mother Tuskegee and Booker, but who have distinguished themselves on oftentimes state, regional, national, and international stages. If you will recall, this time last year, we invited Miss Marilyn Mosby to be our homecoming convocation speaker. And then almost immediately thereafter, she was catapulted into the national stage, the international stage, with many of the issues that were occurring in Baltimore. And this year equally, we have another person who perhaps in about a couple of years may be catapulted onto an even greater national stage, international stage. I encourage you all to mark this moment. Mr. James Evans. Since my arrival here at Tuskegee University, I've pointed out the very clear, obvious thing that Tuskegee has always done. Tuskegee has always won, and Tuskegee has always made history. In 2013, Mr. James Evans was elected as the first African American to be the state chairman of the Utah Grand Old Party. That's the GOP. In 2002, he was the first African American Republican elected to the Utah State Senate. And I think that's also deserving of a round of applause. Now, I know many of you might not have lived in Utah, or you might not have heard of Utah, but let me assure you, these milestones achieved by an African American are no small feats. And guess what? He's a son of Booker and a son of Mother Tuskegee. So I wish to say to each and every one of you, it is not only my honor, but it's my distinguished pleasure and deep and abiding sense of honor to have the opportunity to introduce to you, to reintroduce to his classmates, Mr. James Evans, who will graciously share words from his experiences, particularly his experiences learned here at his alma mater, Tuskegee University, the pride of the swift growing South. Mr. Evans, welcome.
Well, Mr. President, I want to thank you for this opportunity. It's been 30 years approximately since I've been back to Tuskegee, and I can distinctly remember sitting up in that middle section when Coretta Scott King spoke here, and we had the opportunity to individually greet her and have just a few seconds to say hello and express how much we appreciate her sacrifice and all that she has done for this nation. And that was one of those pivotal moments, you know, as a student, that I had the chance to essentially touch history. And it's those types of moments here at Tuskegee that are just something that I will always remember and have used as inspiration as I moved forward. But I would like to acknowledge Trustee Clayton and President Johnson and his lovely wife. I've enjoyed the time I've spent with you thus far. And to the other board members that I've had the opportunity to interact with, and especially the class of 1985. That's my alumni class. Okay. I won't tell them what we used to do. I'll just leave that. You're welcome. And to the students, the current students that are here, this is your magical time. This is the opportunity that you have to grow and experience in ways that perhaps you never will again because you're going from your teenage years to your early adulthood, and everything is possible. That was my feeling when I was here at Tuskegee. It was never a concept about obstacles. It was always just, if you want to do something, you move forward and do it. And that was that inviting environment and atmosphere that I experienced. But President Johnson, I also want to just acknowledge the support staff here. I have been, in my capacity, I travel quite a bit. And I want to tell you, your support staff has just been amazing. From your police force, you were gracious enough to have one of your police officers come pick me up from the airport. And I just want to thank you that I was so glad I was sitting in the front seat and not in the back. You know, we got a little statistical problem there. And from the housekeepers over at the Kellogg Center, the kitchen staff, just everyone that I interacted with at a support level, they had this positive energy and this inviting spirit. And oftentimes they are the first face that many visitors see when they come on the campus. So that to me is a direct reflection on your vision. And I want to thank you for that, because oftentimes an institution is measured not by those at the top, but those who are on the ground level that you first engage. And so that is something I want to thank you. And also, I would like to recognize my colleague and counterpart here in Alabama, the chairwoman of the Alabama Republican Party, Ms. Terry Lathan. If you'd be so kind as to stand. Now, I talked with Chairwoman Layton. She called me when she heard I was going to be here at Tuskegee, and she rearranged her schedule, and she says, I want to be there. I want to show support. I want to send a message from the Alabama Republican Party that we're open, inviting, and we want to continue the dialogue and the discussion on how we move forward. And so for that, I want to thank you for making the opportunity to be here. And also, we can connect together on all of your major donors so we can hook them up with the president here and get some contributions, you know. But I want to tell you that it's just been wonderful being back here at Tuskegee. You renamed the dorms, but I used to live in Resident Hall C. And then Resident Hall, I believe it was B. I'm starting to lose track, yeah. And then like many who go into their junior year, I moved off campus, you know, because I thought I was grown and could do my own, you know. And the reason I was able to do that is because I got the ROTC scholarship, and that paid $100 a month stipend, and my rent was $90 a month. So I had $10 left over. You know, and so even there I was economically conservative. But many of you may not know, the reason I ended up at Tuskegee is President Peyton was a childhood friend of my father. We grew up in the same town. We went to the same church. His mother was there all of my life. And he was visiting in 1981 and mentioned that he would be starting as president of Tuskegee, and I was accepted at the University of South Carolina, where I was going to major in chemical engineering. And he says, well, we have an engineering program, we have chemical engineering, why don't you come down to Tuskegee? And I thought for a second and said, well, Tuskegee is 6 hours from my house, and University of South Carolina was 30 minutes, so I figured I'd go with the 6 hours, you know. You know, at that age, you want to get away from your parents, and until something comes up, then you're on the phone saying, how long could it take you to get here? And help me out. But from that, with that connection with Dr. Peyton, and in Orangeburg, South Carolina, where I grew up, that in Orangeburg, we have two historically black universities, South Carolina State University and Claflin University. So like many in the college towns with HBCUs, you kind of live in this bubble where you see so many accomplished African Americans with doctorates and just all sorts of unique backgrounds and accomplishments. And so from that perspective, you grow up and it's just never a consideration that you can't accomplish what it is that you want to accomplish. But at that time, as a child growing up, it never dawned upon you until you look back, just the bubble that they created in that protective environment that they have made so that you could be raised up relatively unscarred psychologically from those who would try to tear you down. And I recognize now that that has not been a common experience of our collective community. And so all to more my commitment to historically black colleges and universities for that nurturing environment and that protective environment. And we must recommit and rededicate our opportunities and our abilities to make sure that they remain strong and that they remain vital and that they can grow in the future to encompass and accommodate our growing population. So, President Johnson, I share your vision of your desire to grow the university, to make it more inviting, to accommodate the growing population that it can serve. And with that, that will be that many more opportunities for our community and others to experience and to benefit from Mother Tuskegee. So today, I want to just give you a little bit more of my background and give just a small talk about Republicans. Now, I'm not trying to convert anybody, okay? That's Chairwoman Layton's job. And she'll meet you in the back. But I just wanted to just tell you, after graduating Tuskegee, I got commissioned into the United States Air Force, and when I received my degree in chemical engineering. And I ended up at Procter & Gamble, and many of our engineers end up at Procter & Gamble because they have a close relationship with Tuskegee. And I'll never forget that summer before, they had an internship program, and so we, our junior going into senior year, many of us went and worked in Cincinnati as interns. And the very first thing I did when I got there is I just simply wrote up my objectives, what I wanted to accomplish that summer. And it wasn't anything that I really thought about. It was just because growing up, that's all I've ever seen adults in my life do. They would set out what it is they wanted to accomplish. So not my direct supervisor, but her boss came in and asked me I think she said, I'm trying to remember the terms, who told you to do this? And I thought, well, my goodness, I must have gotten in trouble. And I says, well, no one. I just wanted to let you know what it is I wanted to accomplish this summer. And she says, my full-time engineers they don't even do this. So who made you do this? I says, I didn't even ever think about it. That was to me common sense. And right there, she says, well, I want you to know you're hired when you graduate because you have done something that has shown that you have a measure of perspective that many don't have. And I liken that, again, to my HBCU environment. When you're around so many people, and so around just so many positive individuals, and I can't stress that enough, how important it is to be around positive people who want to lift up. And that's my whole life's mission, is to lift up wherever I'm at, because without doing that, we just will not survive as a community of people. Now, from Procter & Gamble, I had my commission into the United States Air Force. I served as Deputy Corps Commander here at the ROTC unit here at Tuskegee. And so I left Procter & Gamble, took a leave of absence from there and went into the Air Force and drove across country to Sacramento, to Mather Air Force Base, and got my accomplishment it was my assignment into the E3A Airwax, because I graduated from the Navigator Training School. So the E3A Airwax, I don't know if you recall, but it's the plane that has the dome that turns around and monitors the sky. And it does a few other things too that you can see on the ground, which was pretty neat to, as we traveled over countries, you can kind of see what's going on the ground. But I got commissioned, I got my aircraft and relocated to Oklahoma City. to Tinker Air Force Base, and I believe one of our trustees is Oklahoma City. And then from there, it was the same experience, something that my father always taught me. You go to work early, and you take the hardest jobs. And that's exactly what I did. I would show up early, and when we were not flying, we had what was called additional duties. And so I just observed who didn't want to do what job. And so the most difficult job was the scheduling. And at the time I didn't know, I just knew it was difficult because nobody wanted it. So I volunteered to be a scheduler when I was not flying. And then I soon realized why no one wanted that. Because let me tell you, you do not want to engage a military officer's wife who's ticked off that you just scheduled her husband on their anniversary for a trip out of the country, okay? And that was not a pleasant experience. But what I quickly learned is how to utilize that to my advantage. And so what I would do is I would just simply find out when all the anniversary dates were, special occasions, and that wasn't hard to do. All you got to do is talk to one wife, and she'll get the word out and get all the information back. And it says, hey, Lieutenant Evans wants to look out for us. So what do you know, so I had my little list and made sure that I could move people around and trade on opportunities to, especially our more senior officers, when I did a benefit for them, they looked out for me, and, you know, just typical things we've had to do through the centuries. And oftentimes it's called a hookup. So we just did these kinds of things. So as a result, as a second lieutenant, and I was always in the office when I wasn't flying, my commander tapped me to go to the training school to become the chief instructor navigator, ahead of those who were more senior. And I'll never forget that one of the more senior officers complained. Now keep in mind, this was in the 1980s, and a more senior officer complained that I was tapped because I'm African American. And I thought about that for a second, and then I just mentioned to my commander, because we would work closely together, I says, did you pick me just because I'm black? And he says, no, who would tell you that? And I just said, well, you know, that's kind of what the feedback I've gotten. So he went down into the flight squadron and just called everybody to attention and said, I want to clear up one thing. He says, Evans got picked over all of you because he's the only one that's here when he's not flying, and when the opportunity came up, I had to send somebody, and because he's here doing what he's supposed to do, he got to go over you. And as a result, all the other senior officers then start showing up doing what they were supposed to do. So, but once again, that comes from nurturing environment, learning from your parents and other adults in the community. You model yourself after what you know. And all my parents have known, like your parents and many of you, is hard work. That's what we know, and that's what we do. And we're going to give integrity to our job and do the best that we can. Now, from that, I would rotate through Iceland, from Iceland to Saudi Arabia and back and forth, and I can go on with all of the different experiences there, but suffice it to say that that helped shape my worldview about foreign policy and about how we engage the rest of the world and what it means to be American. And oftentimes we look at America as our government, and it really is not our government. America is her people. It really is the collective accomplishments and energy and productivity of 300 million plus Americans, not the government that sits in Washington, D.C., that spends our tax dollars and are constantly bickering with each other. So as long as we stay lifted up as a people, a nation of people, we will remain strong. The moment we stop doing that is the moment that we cease to be a strong nation. And my concern is that as we move forward, we're increasingly becoming not as productive because of a whole host of reasons that I would like to get into. But I just wanted to just let you know, I gave those examples about, about my past to connect it back to not only Tuskegee, but the HBCUs in which I grew up on. And if everyone could just, when I have people ask me all the time, where'd you graduate? And I said, Tuskegee University. Some have heard of it. They've heard of Booker T. Washington. And I say, it's a historically black college. And they would say, you mean blacks have colleges? I says, yeah, about 105 of them, as a matter of fact. But what we are ambassadors. We are examples of our university. And so from that one engagement or interaction, it measures our university. So if they say, well, James seems to have it together, so that means the university he came from must have it together. It's that sort of connection, and I cannot tell you how valuable and impactful that is. And I tell everybody, wherever I go, somewhere in the conversation, I let them know I graduated from Tuskegee. And I do that. As a matter of fact, I got an email yesterday, and President Johnson, you don't know this, and I don't want to say it, because the moment I say it, then the development officer is going to be all over me. But is that one of Mitt Romney's, well, his major contributor is a very dear friend of mine, and I was talking about coming to speak here at Tuskegee and how we want to raise money, and he was emailing me saying, well, did you do your speech yet? What about, what are ways you can contribute? And he constantly complains about how tough he has it because he only has $200 million. And while I'm sitting in his 20,000 square foot house, he's just, you know, and this kind of stuff that gives Republicans a bad name, you know, but the point simply is this, is that he's even excited about Tuskegee because of his relationship with me, and he wants to visit and see and these kinds of things. But we can extrapolate that to many of our graduates who are in corporate America and have been able to get their corporations to contribute to Tuskegee and other foundations. It's all that collective effort, which is what I think we should always be mindful of. It's not just the big dollars, it's also the small dollars that also benefit our university. And so I would appeal to everyone, including me, so I'm talking to me too, is to make sure that we contribute to Tuskegee. And so from there, after I got out of the military, I relocated to Salt Lake City, Utah, and there are not many of us there. But interestingly enough, Utah has been a very inviting environment for people who are not white. Like we have approximately 20,000 African refugees that are resettled from Somalia and Chad, and also a lot of Eastern Europeans that have come from conflict. So Utah has been a very inviting state for relocating refugees. But what's been, I think, the most compelling about Utah is its entrepreneurial spirit. That while Utah is predominantly Mormon, and our Republican Party is heavily Mormon, for the pragmatic approach has always been, if there's something you want to do in Utah, there's an openness and an inviting environment to say, let's get together and let's make it happen. And I think that comes from the fact that from the Mormon Church's perspective, they have missionaries that go all over the world, so they have brought back that international perspective. And as a result, many people of many races have benefited from it. So I decided in the area that I live in, which is relatively diverse, it's about a 68% Democrat district, and I decided I was going to run for the Utah State Senate. And the Utah State Senate, we had already had about 20 Republicans and 9 Democrats. This district was 68% Democrat, always has been a Democrat district, and everyone said there's no way that you could win. Well, those are all the words I need to hear. It's when someone tells me I can't do something. And so I just simply sat down and devised a strategy, and I called it the grandmother strategy. And the grandmother strategy is simply this, is that grandmothers between usually 3 and 5 are getting dinner ready. So, you know, they're going to be at home. And what I did is I got my voter list and I made sure, and I could cross-reference and see kind of who was related to who. I had to kind of guess at that. But as I went and talked to the grandmothers, because oftentimes their children and their grandchildren lived in the same area, I talked to them about whatever they want to talk about. I didn't talk about being Republican or Democrat or anything. I just told them I'm running for office, and we would engage in this conversation. And what I started to notice is that over time, by the time I could get to their child or their grandchild, they would say, oh yeah, my mom or my grandma called me and said that this very nice young man came and he's running for office and you should support him. I really enjoyed my conversation, and that they were my greatest advocates. And by the time they figured out that I wasn't Democrat, it was too late, because now they like me, you see? And that's what I've learned. If you like someone, it doesn't really matter if they're Republican or Democrat, if they're going to address your concerns. And so that's what I did, is I figured I'll get them to like me. And then so from that, I wanted an upset, and it was something that they thought would never happen. And then so from there, served, and eventually the Democrats took that seat back, but I was ready to move on. And then the next big challenge was the chair of the Utah Republican Party. Now, as I stated before, we have a large Republican population, and the way that we elect our state party chairs is we have 4,000 state delegates, and 98% of our state delegates are white and Mormon, and I'm Baptist and black. And I was running against a favorite son, who came right out of Central Casting and would be the perfect fit for chair. But once again, I analyzed and said, how will this race be won? And it was going to be won on the speech. And so that's where I focused my effort, and ended up winning with a 60% vote. And then up for re-election, we had a very difficult challenge where, and many of you probably have heard about, there's a rift within Republicans. You have Tea Party Republicans, you got Chamber of Commerce, or quote, establishment Republicans. Well, that's kind of going on through the nation, and I'm going to address that a little bit, but later on in my speech. But essentially, those with deep pockets wanted to assert more control over our state party, because if you get the party's nomination, it's a 90+% chance you're going to become the elected official. So most of the races were won there. And they changed the nominating process. We filed a lawsuit in court. We prevailed on that. And as a result, I'm up against billionaires and multimillionaires who were furious and tried as they might to get someone to run against me. My re-election, I was unopposed, because no one would run against me, because the delegates were already supporting what I was doing. So at the end of the day, I'm re-elected the state party chair. We're moving forward, and my focus now is more the national level, and I'll get to some of our candidates. I know Mr. Trump and the rest of them. We'll talk about that. But I just wanted to just quickly just kind of give you that background as I move forward so you can kind of see where I'm coming from. So again, I want to thank you for allowing me to speak, and it's just an extreme pleasure to be here. So today, my hope is that we can leave this chapel lifted up with new information, new ideas, and most importantly, that we know as a community of people that we have new options, primarily to make sure that we get what we should be getting as a community of people. As I've stated before, I'm a Republican, and I even know that invokes some images, some thoughts, and even some attitudes. And depending on the day, I may have an attitude. What I hear on the news, and I see somebody making a dumb statement, and I'm just thinking, are you kidding me? You know, and so, but I'm okay with those responses, because those are your life experiences. And in this exchange, that's what we have to value. We have to value one another. And so oftentimes I get tired of this, Republican this, Democrat that. It seems like a distraction. It's like you're reducing people to labels, and we're not getting underneath to what's really going on, because we're $18 trillion in debt, but we don't own anything. I mean, Social Security is not fully funded. The roads need to be repaired, and I'm thinking 18 trillion, we should own something. Can anybody think of anything we own for 18 trillion? Is anything fully funded? Is anything satisfied? And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, it seems like something else is going on here. And I think if we get beyond these labels is where we truly can connect and say, we need to get some problems solved. If the government makes a promise, they need to keep it. Our seniors and others have paid into Social Security. They shouldn't have to worry about whether the money's going to be there when they're in their most vulnerable time of life. And that shouldn't even be a discussion, a question, and we shouldn't be going back and forth. But unfortunately, all the money is spent. You know, there are $5 trillion worth of IOUs in the Social Security Trust Fund, and that should be $5 trillion in cash. And that kind of stuff happens when we don't stay focused as voters. We allow these elected officials, and that's Republican and Democrat, I call them all out, because this is our money. We worked hard. We got our own bills to pay, and when we have to give some over to the government, they should use it wisely and to the best interest of us. So the real question that I think we should be asking is, as a community of people, we don't seem to be getting our fair share. And that, to me, is the central focus. Now, I'm on a university campus, and I see all of this academic accomplishment over here. So I'm going to give a little bit of data. Now, I'm a little bit intimidated because I see the doctors and researchers, and I know some of you might question, you know, anytime somebody breaks up data, you want to know, well, what kind of data is it? You know, do I know this data? Where has it been? You know, did you do a background check on the data? I mean, I want to know that it's legitimate. And so I would say it's for illustrative purposes more than actual, and it denotes a trend more than actual fact, because the information is always a moving target. There are about 42 million African Americans in America, and that includes those that identify as African American and African American plus another race. And our poverty rate is about 28%. And if you segment it out to single mothers that are head of household, that poverty rate's 47%. And that's just unacceptable. But for married couples, that's 8.4%. And then I found this interesting statistic, which is directly relevant to us here at university. And I'm just focusing on black men because the sisters seem to have it together. And we got some work to do. But black men, there are about 1,037,000 black men in college. But in prison is 841,000 black men. Now, and then when you compare our incomes, the black family income is about $40,000 a year, but when you compare it to all families, the average is about $62,000 a year. And education attainment. Black men are about 17% bachelor degrees out of 30% of all men, and black women are about 22% bachelor degrees out of 30% of all women. So the question really is, why am I giving these statistics? Well, I give these statistics to say because they're directly related to politics. And then many of you ask, well, what is politics? So I'm going to break down politics in its Latin root, what it means, okay? Poly means many, and ticks means blood-sucking creatures. So, well, that's my definition, but since I'm in academia, we'll go to Webster. Webster says politics is the activities, actions, and policies that are used to gain and hold power in a government or to influence a government. And that's essentially what we need to focus on. So I want to spend a few minutes talking about our activities and our actions used to gain and hold power, because that's what it's about, okay? And then there are three key components here when we're talking about activities and how to influence, okay? You can do it by money, you You can do it by power, and that tends to come from the business community, education, networking, or the simplest and most impactful and most immediate way is the vote. Because a politician responds quicker to a vote than anything else. When they see how the vote result happened, if it didn't go their way, they're at your doorstep trying to figure out what can we do to make it better. But until that vote changes, nothing else will change. It's that simple. So let me give you some quick statistics on voting. And this comes from, to all the academia, this comes from Pew Research. So this data should be something that's more acceptable. So in the white population, 40% tend to vote Democrat, 49% tend to vote Republican. In the Hispanic population, 56% tend to vote Democrat, 26% Republican. Amongst the Asians, 65% tend to vote Democrat, 23% Republican. And amongst the black community, approximately 90% vote Democrat and approximately 10% Republican. So when you look at this breakdown and then you start asking yourself, well, it seems as though, and I'm going to just kind of focus in on the Hispanic community. I think there's this feeling even now, there are about 11 million individuals in this country, primarily of Hispanic heritage, that are in the country undocumented. And there's this feeling that even those undocumented individuals seem to have more clout than working class and poor blacks. And you ask yourself, well, how is that happening? Well, it happens because of the vote. When individuals, when politicians, political parties feel they have an opportunity to get your vote, then they want to know exactly what do I need to do to secure that vote. If they believe they've already completed the transaction and you're satisfied, and we're satisfied by our actions, by how we continue to vote, then they said, okay, we've settled that, let's move on to the next group. So that's an example of what I'm talking about, the most impactful and immediate way that you can, that as a community of people, we can affect change. Now, we can talk all day about the numbers, but for me, I'm just more of a, I'm not so much of a statistical guy, but more of a, the way that I like to interact. And so I says, okay, I've given you the numbers, but at the core, you ask yourself, well, why is that happening? Well, let's be honest. The Democrat Party, Democrat elected officials have just done a much better job at connecting with our community. And the Republican Party and Republicans have not. That's just the bottom line. And what has happened is that we have two choices. I mean, we're out here saying, well, does James Evans want me to become a Republican, or does he want me to vote Republican? And I'm not here to convince anybody of anything. What I'm saying is that we have an opportunity now to say, how can we leverage our political influence to the best of our ability? I don't know, there may be a Republican you like, there may be one you don't like, but those are decisions that we all make individually. And as a result, I can tell you that as a black man who was born in 1963 in South Carolina, I don't just give my vote to anybody. You're going to have to earn it. So if you promise you were going to say you were going to do A or B and you don't do it, then the likelihood is I'm not going to vote for you again. So as chair of the Utah Republican Party, I can promise you every Republican in Utah has to earn my vote. It's just not automatic. Because when I walk into that booth to vote, and I'll tell you, and it's a little bit embarrassing, I talk to the ballot. I mean, I go down the list, and I ask them, you know, in my own head here, you know, one of the things I ask is, do you deserve my ancestors' vote? See, that's the key, because they're the ones that had to struggle and make sure. Now, if you're some jive time, half-stepping person just talking about what you're going to do and you've been saying the same thing for the last 10 years and nothing's been done, you don't deserve my ancestors' vote. You don't deserve me casting the ballot for you. So that's the lens through which I look. I look at the fact that, I mean, when I would talk to my father and my mother and we all have those experiences of memory through our ancestors and everything that they have gone through, And then I look and I say, are we going to just so easily hand our vote over to anybody? I don't care what party it is, but just so easily hand it over and they don't deliver. I just look and say, my grandmother, my grandfather, my great-grand, they just deserve more than that. They fought so hard to give me this right to affect change and to affect the power structure that I'm going to make sure when I cast that ballot, it's for not only my best interest, but the best interest of the community of people from which I'm from. And that's kind of how I focus on it. Then I wanted to go back to some of the statistics that we just talked about. And you remember I quoted to you that in order for something different to happen, we have to do something different. And that's what it comes down to. And everyone has to make that decision for themselves. And it's hard, and I know it is, it's hard for us as a community of people to change because we're cautious by nature and we're very patient. So those two things, while they have enabled us through the generations, we had to be cautious because we never knew what was around the corner. And we had to be very patient because we didn't have any power. We just had to endure until a better day. And so we've been let down over and over and over again, but one of the things that sustained us is our ability to be patient. And one of the ways that we've gotten through and in being patient is every Sunday morning we're in church getting that spiritual booster shot to make it through the next week, waiting for a better day. And I want to tell you that better day is now, because we now have the ability to literally determine the outcome of elections based on what we choose to do. And it's up to us to decide how much do we want for our vote. And that's something that we have to individually ask ourselves. It's not something that could be mandated to you or dictated. And no one should tell any of us that because of the color of our skin, we have to be associated with any political party. No, because of the color of my skin, I get to do what I want, because I'm an American. And that's the way that I approach this. Okay, so this is my last bit of data. And I was kind of feeling like I was getting a master's or doctorate when I was doing my little data, I'm just trying to impress all these doctors around here. But let's look at something that's really to the heart of who we are. I mean, that impacts us more than anything. And that is the unemployment. The unemployment rate and I'm not even talking about segmenting it out to teenagers, or just I'm talking about on average. Unemployment for the black community is about 10.4%. For whites, 4.7%. Hispanics, 6.6%. For Asians, 4%. Now remember that definition I talked about politics. And I said it's the activities, actions, and policies that are used to gain and hold power in government or to influence a government. If we want to influence government on one thing, it should be to make sure that we have economic opportunity so that we can have a job, so that we can have economic prosperity. And after 300 plus years, and we're still trying to get a job, there's something wrong with that, okay? So one of the things I looked at says, okay, who employs us? Now, here's my last little data point. I looked at the business formation and the different communities that I've talked about. In the black community, from the census data, our gross receipts, meaning a combined activity of black businesses, was about $137 billion. Okay? For the Asian community, now the Asian community is about 6% of the population, no, about 3% of the population. The black community is about 13% of the population. But the Asian community business receipts are $513 billion. The white community, of course, would be the largest. Their receipts are about 10 trillion with a T. And then the Hispanic community is 345 billion. So who are you most likely to get hired by? That's somebody that knows you. Who's most likely to know you? Those are the people who live around you, to go to your church, that you engage with. And oftentimes, they tend to be people who have some kind of societal connection to you. And so they tend to look like you. So one of the biggest focuses, from my perspective, is the ability for us to create more businesses so that we can hire more people who look like us. And that's one of the main attractions I have to the Republican Party, is the fact that the greatest way to economic prosperity is if you can go out and create your own business and you're able to then hire your family, your friends. If Leroy got in trouble and had to spend some time with the government and got out of jail, and he's my nephew, I know him, I can hire him. But if Leroy then tries to go into somebody else's business, they're like, no, I can't hire you. That's what I'm talking about. It's what we have to do that for ourselves. And so the biggest thing when we look at these statistics is we're going to ask ourselves, okay, what does this all mean as we move forward? And probably the biggest obstacle that we face as Republicans is our delivery. So I've told you all of this wonderful stuff, if I say so myself, and then you're going to turn on the TV and see Mr. Trump up there saying something, and it's all out the window. So this is so trust me, these are the things that frustrate me to no end. If I can just grab them up in the collar and sit them down and say, come on, man, really? You want to talk about throwing people out of the country? You can't, black people don't want to hear nothing about throwing anybody anywhere. All that kind of stuff just transfers to us and invokes images and imagery about, okay, I can't trust this one. If he's going after the Hispanics today, I'm next. And this is what I'm talking about. So any speech, any communication that does not uplift, we're out the door. And I get it, And even when we then say, well, wait a minute, so-and-so Democrat elected official, whatever, say they were going to do this, this, and this, but they didn't do it. But in our heart, we're saying, but at least they're not trying to hurt me, And this is this thing that as a Republican Party, we simply have to overcome. And I want to say to you today, the fact that you have Chairwoman Terry Lathan here, she has a commitment to make sure that, and we all face it, I'm out there duking it out with some crazy people in Utah, just like she has to do here in Alabama. And that's just, anytime you're dealing with human beings, that's what you're going to get. And a lot of times, it's not like they really mean any harm, but we just don't know. And we're cautious, and if it sounds not too good, I'm not going to take a shot on it. I'm not going to take a chance because we just don't have that many options. So we tend to be a little bit more skittish and conservative. We have to be. Especially when we're an economically vulnerable community of people and we don't feel we have that many options, we tend to stick with at least what we know, even if it's not the best that we would like, at least it's better than the unknown. And so in the space that we're operating in is my desire to help define the unknown in a way that is at least somewhat relevant, or that you can say, I guess they're not as bad as I thought. Or you just never know, because it's not just a national level, just on your local level. You have your legislative races, your state senate races, your governor, all of these just different races. And I'm going to tell you, the people who can most impact you are on that city council, because they're the ones coming around, when they're going to pick up your trash, when they're going to, if they're going to take a part of your property. So at the end of the day, we recognize, Chairwoman Lathan and I and every other state party chair recognizes what we're up against when it comes to presentation. And so we own that, because I speak to you in truth and honesty, and that's just the only way I know how to be. And so I will give you an example. My United States Senator, Mike Lee, when he got elected, we had ongoing conversations, and as a result, he has, well, I can't take full credit for it, but I'm saying in part of our conversations, along with many others, He teamed up with Dick Durbin, the United States Senator from Illinois, and they have sponsored the Smarter Sentencing Reform because he says it makes no sense to lock somebody up for 20 years for a nonviolent crime. You're taking them from their families. You're taking them from their families, and as a result, that creates another whole cycle of problems. And so we have to say, what is the public policy impact we're trying to achieve? Are we trying to deter crime, or are we trying to destroy a community? And it feels like sometimes, and maybe it's just me, that somebody's trying to destroy us. You know, you just never know. And while it feels that way, analytically we know it's not that way, but that's the space in politics that I'm talking about. Perception is reality, okay? And this is just something in human nature, as simple as it can be, and that is, if a crime is committed by someone that you know, let's just say it's just a nonviolent crime, you tend not to value it as harshly if it's committed by somebody that you don't know. And that attitude makes its way into policy making decisions and laws. And I'll give you the crack cocaine disparity. Who was selling crack? We were. Who was selling cocaine? They were. Who ended up with the harsher sentences? We did. That's what I'm talking about, because it was something unknown. Now, I'm not out here trying to justify drugs or anything like that, but what we're saying is that with government and with power, it has to be enacted in a way that's fair, that's honorable, and it has a moral dimension, instead of, well, let's just lock up this group because we don't relate to them. And this is across the board. This is Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter. This is more about who the people in power connect with and who they don't. So what I'm saying here is that we have an opportunity as a community of people now to revisit the conversation by our actions and say, look, if you're not delivering what we need in our cities, in our towns, in our community, we're just going to vote for somebody else. And just that one simple action, usually over 1 or 2 election cycles, changes everything. Because it didn't matter who was in office, Republican and Democrat, the impact seemed to be the same, because the calculation by Democrats had been, we have their vote, and by Republicans it's been, well, we're not going to get their vote. So we were kind of in a no-win situation. But every other community of people have said, you know, we're going to split our vote. We're going to make sure that our voice is heard. So, like I said, it's not my role to tell you how to vote or whether to be Republican or not, but I just want to give some information to say, I know how we can be more impactful, how we can have our voice heard in a more forceful way. And so I wanted to just quote in closing here 3 quotes that I love from Booker T. Washington. And it says, associate with people of good quality, for it is better to be alone than to be in bad company. Okay? And I know some of y'all are probably thinking that this homecoming weekend. It's like, did I get back around with some of your old classmates? But it says, here's another one. You can't hold a man down without staying down with him. And see, that's the key one. We feel sometimes that people want to keep us down, but in order for them to keep us down, they have to be down there with us. And most people don't want to do that because they got their own problems. But we may project our uncertainty onto those individuals. And oftentimes it's just, you know, that's not the case because they don't even have the ability, because they're like, look, I'm trying to make my rent or my mortgage. I don't have time to worry about you, you know, that kind of relationship. And finally, if you want to lift yourself up, lift up someone else. And that's the one that I live by, because I'm all about lifting people up. I don't like to, and most of us are this way, you know, we just don't like to engage in a way that tears anyone down. As you can see in my speech today, I did not mention our president, because I'm never going to tear down someone who has accomplished something so historic. And if anything about President Obama, the one thing that we should be most proud of is that he has set the example of how we should treat our sisters, and an example to our sisters on how they deserve to be treated. And if nothing else, and even if I may disagree on some of the policies, the point is that his representation to us as a people is a role model on how anything that we want to accomplish, we can. And so, and this is the point I'm making. We can have differences of opinion on policy, but we should not have differences of opinion on our humanity. We should stick together. We should stick together. We should lift each other up. We should be there when we can for one another. Because I can tell you in Utah, the first call that I get from a lot of Democrats who are African American, when something comes up, they call me. And if it's about the cause of equality, I'm in the car going down the street and we're going to handle it. And that's what we have to be. We have to remember that no matter what political party you're in, first and foremost, this nation has to be equal, it has to be fair, and it has to be moral to all of its citizens. And that's something that I simply demand and expect. And it doesn't matter what political party it is, we have to make sure that happens. And in closing, I just want to thank you again, President Johnson, for inviting me. And I look forward to the opportunity of coming back to Tuskegee and engaging in conversation and meeting new individuals. I have to get down to the engineering building. And most importantly, as you leave and you go back to everyday life, you know, as we say, when you get back on your grind, you know, you got to just make life happen. That one of the things that I always do is I take just a few minutes out of my day, besides thanking the Almighty, is to just reflect and say, what did I accomplish today? You know, was my day more productive at the end of the day than I began? Or did I just waste a day? And because we only get so many of these days, and so I want to make sure that I am I'm doing right by my family, by my community, and I want to make sure, of course, more than anything else, that I'm doing right by the Almighty. And so with that, I just want to close once again by thanking all of you who are current students. Make sure that you do your best in school. I know sometimes it's hard after the weekend. You got to get to that Monday morning class. But the point is this, is that these are your best days. You're not going to be around this many people who are your same age ever again. So enjoy the experience, but make sure you use the experience to benefit you for the rest of your life. So that means get your homework done, make sure that you prepare for your future, and most importantly, find mentors. And President Johnson is doing an excellent job in making sure connecting mentors with students. I cannot stress that that's the most important thing, so that you can visualize what it is you want to be. And part of your visualization is asking those who are in that area, and that helps you to prepare as you make decisions as you move forward. To the alumni, I want to thank you for your support of the university, for coming back, for staying connected, to the faculty, to the staff, for your commitment to excellence in building up and lifting up our great university, and to the administration and to the Board of Trustees, your forward-thinking vision and your commitment to making sure that the university will be sustainable for the long term. I want to thank you all for what you do and for inviting me here today to speak. Thank you.
Now, when I first arrived at Tuskegee University, I had a conversation with each of the 23,000 alumni members. I'm just joking, but I had a conversation with Walter Wortham, and he told me, I want to tell you one thing about Tuskegee University alumni. They're feisty, strong-headed, and if they believe something, they're going to go out and do it. And I tell you, without respect to whether you are part of the red party or the blue party, one thing we know, when we say Tuskegee taught me, you must remember, Tuskegee taught Mr. Evans. He's a man who believes in what he says and most importantly exhibits it by what he does. And I should also point out that my great-grandmother is also from Orangeburg. July 1, 1901 was her birth date, Minnie Sally, and of course you know the Sally family there. But all the same, we embrace not only what Mr. Evans has offered to us, but we also embrace the verity of his perspective and you being exposed to perspectives beyond what you might have normally been exposed to. So with that respect, I'd like to thank you on behalf of Tuskegee University.